welcome back to D's Nerds. I'm Michelle.
I'm Chris.
And today is the very first episode ever of What Are We Reading? We both read, me significantly more, but he still reads a fair bit. And so we thought it would be cool if we shared with you what we're reading, because there's quite a variety between the two of us.
Yeah, I think if you had to really put it down, it was like, you're more like absolute traditional fiction kind of things, and I'm very much in the comic book and nonfiction world, particularly like history, biographies, things like that.
Yeah, I definitely read just a little bit of nonfiction, and pretty much everything of mine is fiction. And I've read a comic book here or there, but it's just kind of not my jam for the most part. So
I think together you get like one well-rounded person kind of a thing.
Which is probably fair in general anyway.
Absolutely.
So I will start us off with something I read a little while ago, and this was one I was really excited to get to and then ended up feeling disappointed. So it's Star Wars Resistance Reborn. And if you don't know, this book was meant to sit in between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker and kind of fill in that giant time gap that was in between the two where you kind of don't know what happened. And so I really had high hopes for learning about that in this book. And I was so disappointed.
Yeah.
First of all, the book's not that long, really. It's, I think, right around 300 pages or so. Yeah, it's 298 pages. Yeah, it's almost on the dot. So it was pretty short, and it didn't really focus on the characters I thought it was going to focus on. I thought we were going to learn a lot more about Rey, and just, I felt like there was going to be a lot more. So basically, all this story does, in the end, is just explain how they worked on trying to get more people back with the rebels after they lost pretty much everybody at the end of The Last Jedi to the Star Destroyer. And so that's what the story is. And it's a lot of political stuff and a little bit of espionage, and I don't know, it was just disappointing. I wanted a lot more from it, so.
Well, I know political stuff, when it comes to that side of it, I think that's been some of your least favorite stuff in Star Wars anyway.
It is probably, but yeah, I thought that they were going to focus more on Rey and that there would be a bigger focus on Poe and Finn. Like, Finn barely does anything, Rey barely does anything, Poe does a little bit more, but it just kind of felt like my big three. That was what I was expecting, and it wasn't what I got, so.
Well, it sounds to me like it's because they did kind of the same thing with Finn in the movies.
Yeah, they kind of did.
They kind of like at one point they set him up like they're going to go really deep, and then they really kind of just go pretty surface level with him, which was kind of disappointing as well.
Yeah, so I've still got, I've read everything now except the Rise of Skywalker, so I'm wondering if there will be anything extra in that for me, but my hopes are kind of low at the moment.
Oh, sorry, Bear.
So something else that I read lately is Fresh by Margot Wood. And I do love this cover. It's actually like just a hard cover, like there's no dust jacket. It's just a hard cover.
Oh, cool.
Which I think is kind of a neat design. I love the colors and stuff. I've seen this on a lot of like popular cool cover lists on Instagram and stuff lately. But this book is about a girl named Elliot who goes to college as a freshman and kind of has no direction, doesn't know what she wants to do, but she is kind of keen to figure it out along the way, but she really makes no plan. Like, she makes really some rough choices in there, and is also kind of lost in the world of trying to find love too. Honestly, it's one of the funniest things I've read in quite a long time. My favorite things that she does in this book, actually, let's see if I can find it really quick. Oh, here's an example. So if you can see that, there's footnotes, but they're like funny footnotes. So in the midst of, things that she's saying in here, she'll have a little footnote attached to it, and it will either explain some like backstory, inside joke, give a silly definition of something, whatever. But I thought this book was a lot of fun, and I've actually been following this author since before she was an author, back when she was on Epic Reads Tea Time way back in the day. So
I remember you.
Yeah,
watching a lot of Tea Time back in the day.
Yes. Yeah, it's still on YouTube. They'll talk. The books are all older now, but basically they used to just sit and talk about all the new releases coming out. They worked for HarperCollins Teen, and I just had the best time watching it. It was a lot of fun and got a lot of great book recommendations from them. So to finally see her write her own book was really cool.
Awesome.
So what have you been reading?
Well, on my end, I figured we'd start with some nonfiction and a biography. So, of course, I'm a huge music fan. Collect a lot of music. I'm a musician as well. So I love, especially like artist biographies, things like that. So a couple years ago, I picked up this one by Leonard Skinner. of course, one of the great rock bands of the 1970s with just a whole lot of great songs. But the story behind this band is really interesting, and how they basically came from nothing and were dirt poor, all the guys in the band. And just, and so this goes really in depth. So the guy who wrote this is Gene Odom, who actually was lead singer Ronnie Van Zant's really close friend, and actually was his essentially bodyguard. And so he was actually with him day in, day out for like most of Ronnie Van Zant's life, and also was on board the plane that crashed that killed several members of the band back in 1977. So it's very interesting to see his take on things, but I feel like he's very balanced in how he approaches it. If you know anything about the band, you know that there was a lot of fighting. They drank a lot. They used a lot of drugs. They were trying to kind of get out of it, but when the plane crash happened, especially Ronnie liked to drink a lot and could be really a mean drunk. He really doesn't skirt that at all. So I like that he's not really trying to, kind of polish over some of the rough patches. But I think he gives a very just naked look at how he sees how things went. And he also does a lot of research. There's a lot of research involved as well. It's not like he's just sitting back going, well, 30 years ago, this is how it looked. He does do quite a bit of research on it, and I think it's actually a really good bio. And it's that story in and of itself, that's the type of story that you see like biopics and movies made about certain musicians and everything, and they change things up and everything, change events. With Lynyrd Skynyrd, you really don't need to. It's literally that dramatic and just the way it all ended as well. So it's a good read. It was a quick read for me. I mean, it's only like I think 200 pages. Of course, the band's career wasn't that long either. It was only like about 7 years or so, but I highly recommend it.
All right, so another one that I read recently was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and this is one I just kept seeing popping up everywhere, and so it's not the type of book that I necessarily normally pick up. I'm not much of a bestsellers reader, not to like be snobby or anything, it's just that usually that's not the kind of book that I read. Bestsellers tend to be a lot of, suspense and mystery and sometimes romance or sometimes just very contemporary, and that's usually just not what I'm all that into. But the concept of this one was really interesting. And so basically, the main character in this, her name is Nora, and she lives in England, and she's kind of one of these people that just nothing in her life went how it was supposed to. And so she's in this really just awful dark spot, and one day decides that she's going to take her own life. And so she takes a bunch of pills and lays down and wakes up inside the Midnight Library. And the librarian is actually a real librarian that she had at her school when she was younger. And so it's like the person shows up as someone that is familiar to her in a setting that is comforting. And so the librarian basically says that every book that's in this infinite library has all of these choices, that if she had made like one different choice at some point, what would her life have been instead? And so she goes through and is basically choosing different books off the shelf based on mistakes she feels like she made at different spots, and trying to find the life that she really wanted. So I still would say that ultimately, fantasy element aside, or science fiction, I suppose, really more in this case, it's still not a book that I would probably normally read. I did like it. I'm still trying to decide if it's like a book that I want to read again. It's one of those, I don't know, I can't decide if for me it's going to work a second time. But I did enjoy it, and if that sounded interesting to you, it was a very fast read. It's another fairly short book, but I found the pages just flew right by because you're so kind of into what she's doing. So I think it's a good choice. All right, so another one is just a major reread for me, and it's one that he's read too, actually, and that is The Hunger Games. Oh, so I hadn't reread these in a while, and I just love them. They're so good. And I'm excited that she's written another one. She wrote The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and that one was also good, and I'm excited that they're making a movie over it.
And of course, you did a review of that book way
did.
back when
Yeah,
it was released.
Yeah, right when it came out, I read it and did a review over that. So we'll make sure and put a card up for that.
Yeah, that was interesting in that I hadn't finished reading that book whenever we shot, and so you did like the non-spoiler part and then the spoiler part, and she does no editing on this channel. Like none. I do all the editing. So she actually had to go in and see like what she wanted to cut. If there was anything, I don't think there's really anything you wanted to cut during that part. But I actually had to like stop at that point. She had to go in and like monitor it and then continue it so I could finish reading it and not be spoiled. So I remember that very much. But I mean, I do legit love those books. I'm not a big fiction guy in the traditional sense, but I think we started reading those together when we first started dating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was like something that we kind of bonded over, immediately. So I always have a lot of love for that franchise.
Because I actually had the series on my Kindle, and I was actually, when we would sit on the phone at night, I was like reading out loud.
Yeah.
So he would get to read with me.
Yeah. And I took the books at one point and finished them on my own. Yeah. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I think I just ended up giving you my Kindle later on so you could finish the other two.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are such good books. The world building in that is, to me, the best part. And I think that's why the fact that she's written now another book and it still totally works makes sense. Because while, yes, the books focus on Katniss and Peeta and all of that, that's not really the point. So the point was kind of the world and how it got to be that way and how they tried to fix it. So I think it's really good.
Yeah, I think building that world out is it's really easy to do. And there's so much to do with that. I mean, you can do pretty much anything. The fact that she chose to go back and tell the story about, President Snow as a kid was very interesting, but I thought it came out great as well.
It did. Definitely gives you a lot of insight into why he was the way he was.
Can't wait for the movie.
Yes.
So this one, I mean, with comics, I have a subscription to Comixology, so I don't really have the physical ones of the ones I'm talking about today here, but the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic series done by Eastman and Laird, I read volume 3 of that, which had several episodes or several issues in it, and essentially what it does is it tells the story after they're defeated by the Shredder and they basically go into exile to Casey Jones's farm, and then there's like the adventures that happen there. One of them, like they take down some type of militia group that's there that ends up hunting them, and they hunt them down. And there's other ones going back. Some funny ones, some not so funny ones. There's even one that's really out there about some former superheroes that are older. And then there's this bad guy that's like their arch nemesis is like out to get them, even though they're like all really old. Like one of them's kind of like a Flash knockoff, but he can't. He's in a wheelchair, but he has like a really like souped up wheelchair that can withstand speeds. So all he can do is like move his arms really fast, so he can do like the tornado thing.
Oh gosh.
So, I mean, but it ends up like you're sitting there thinking this is so silly, but then at the end, and I won't spoil it too much, but it has a really kind of sad end to it, really in a lot of ways. But then it's also kind of hopeful at the end as well. So that was a story that really stuck out. And then inevitably their return to New York, where they decide, okay, we need to take out the Shredder and move on with our lives. And some of it's because I haven't really read these in depth. I'm a huge Turtles fan, obviously. But my way kind of came more through the '87 cartoon and then through the movies. And I read some comics. I had several as a kid, but I never really did a really hardcore dive into the original series. So I'm doing that now. One thing that I think is interesting in some of the notes that I think it was Peter Laird was talking about was that he doesn't see the Turtles as kind of like a superhero, whereas that's kind of how they're portrayed in most versions. And so there are kind of several things that go along with their actions that don't really go along with the typical superhero route. Like they return, take out the Shredder, not because the Shredder's a criminal, but it's for their honor. And it's, in a lot of ways, it's for pretty selfish reasons. But that doesn't change anything for me personally. But it's interesting that the creators, or at least one of the creators, sees it in a completely different light than what I think a lot of other people do. So it ends great. I mean, it ends on a very great note, very triumphant note, and then the last kind of shot on that is really cool. So it's definitely a collection I recommend. And if you're a Turtles fan, it's something you need to go back and review.
Next up that I've got is Barbarian Alien by Ruby Dixon. Now, this is part of the now, I guess, kind of infamous via TikTok Blue Alien romance series. This is the second book, and this is the one that just came out in paperback. I just did a review of this whole series and its closest related series, Ice Home. So if you haven't watched that video yet and you're interested in these, go watch that. I've got actually another couple of related series to talk about here, but they're definitely more loosely related.
We'll put a card up here for you to go to that video.
So those other ones, I have Kindle Unlimited, and all of Ruby Dixon's books are on Kindle Unlimited. So this is my Kindle. It's a look at the
I guess for the record, there's mine. So there you go.
His is a fire, and mine is just a Paperwhite. So
she loves her Paperwhite. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, my poor cover is like fraying at the edges because it like goes everywhere with me.
No, literally, it goes everywhere. Like, I mean, doesn't matter where, it's in her purse, and because heaven forbid if you have a moment where you can't read, right?
Well, heaven forbid I get stuck somewhere and all I have to look at is my phone, because if you don't know this about me, I am not much of a phone person. I am totally content to just leave my phone somewhere and go. So I'd much rather have this. But anyway, the other two series that I've been reading, I have been reading The Corsairs and the Rizdiverse. So they all take place in the same universe as the Ice Planet Barbarians and Ice Home series, which are all very closely related because they're on the same planet and the characters cross over. The Corsairs are the same kind of alien, the big blue tall Masaka aliens that are in those series, but they're the ones that have never, like, they weren't on that planet. They came from like their home world and are just the Corsairs particularly are pirates in space. And then the Rizdiverse is another planet where some human slaves were dropped off, and so then some of the characters, I think at various points, have crossed over, or were mentioned in one series and pop up in another. So they're loosely related. I don't know why I'm holding this up. You can't see anything, but they're kind of all loosely related. So I do know that from one of the group I'm in on Facebook that I guess all of Ruby Dixon's book for the most part are in the same universe. So you'll kind of pick up on that, either that you see species across one and the other, or you'll occasionally get characters that are mentioned from one to the other. So they're really fun. They're really short. I literally read 24 of them in January. So they take no time for me to read at all. They're very easy, but they're a lot of fun. They're just, light, like, don't want to put too much thought in it kind of reads.
So on my end, of course, I had another music bio thing, and this one's a little bit bigger. But of course, I'm also a huge Jimi Hendrix fan. Just think he was absolutely stunning, and even just a lot of his releases, especially after he died, or even just stuff of him jamming in the studio, and it just kind of shows how good he was. That the jams are almost as interesting as the works that he worked on and actually released during his lifetime. So, but what I did was, and we bought this, I think, a year ago. I think it was maybe over in.
I think it was our anniversary last year.
Yeah. But I bought it's this Jim, of course, Hendrix, the illustrated story, and it's got some really cool photos in it. But it tells it tells his bio. It's a good bio. I've read more detailed ones. And he's got an interesting backstory and just kind of how he, between his upbringing and how kind of latchkey kid he really was. And I mean, dirt poor, to, going into the army, getting out of the army, becoming a musician and just basically playing in all these different R&B bands, everyone from, the Isley Brothers to Little Richard to Jackie Wilson. I mean, you name a huge R&B soul act from the 60s, and he probably backed them up at some point, to then getting discovered by Chas Chandler of the Animals, going over to England, the whole bit. It does a good job, but I've read better. I've read more in depth, but I think the photos that they include in here are really nice. Like they include like a lot of full page kind of stuff there, if you can see kind of there. So it's a lot of really cool stuff, and also some different things like artwork for singles, rare singles that were released, things like that. So overall, with the pictures and everything, I think it's a good overall overview of Hendrix, but there's definitely a lot more to dig into. I think for a guy who only lived 27 years, there's a lot to dig into there. So not just his life, but just musically as well. So, but I do recommend it if you're someone who really hasn't learned that much about Hendrix or read into Hendrix that much. It's a great start.
All right, so the last thing I've been reading lately is actually World of Warcraft, War of the Ancients. This is a trilogy, so it looks massive, but it is 3 books. But this is a really... I read this 3 times now. Okay, I want to say that first. I'm going to do a review on this soon because I have a lot of feelings. But this story is about basically the Burning Legion trying to come in way, like 10,000 years before World of Warcraft takes place, and coming through the Well of Eternity with the Night Elves and trying to take everybody in Azeroth down. This is actually, you'll kind of learn about how the continents end up being 2 continents instead of 1. So basically you get the split. You can learn how Malfurion and Illidan Stormrage become who we know them by the time we actually reach World of Warcraft and Burning Crusade and all of that. And Tyrande Whisperwind as well. And then you'll see, like some of the dragons and the younger forms. It's a really good story. But I think I'm gonna save it saying much more than that for my actual review, because like I said, I read this 3 times and I have thoughts. But if you're a World of Warcraft person in any form, this is really cool backstory. So I really recommend this. I don't know. I think you can still pick this up used. I think I've seen it on Amazon used for pretty cheap, but they don't actually print this anymore. So if you get it, it's going to be used. But I do really enjoy reading a lot more of the history of these, history of the World of Warcraft stuff.
All right, so the last thing that I read this month, it was, of course, The Batman is being released on March 4th. And on March 1st, we have tickets to the IMAX pre-screening, which... oh my gosh, and you found them. I love you for that. You're amazing. So, but in doing that, I've had some, what I like to call Batman homework, which of course involves watching all the live action films, Batman the Animated Series, but specifically for this version of the Batman, trying to dig into some stuff that really influenced the film, and particularly within regards to the comics. So, Matt Reeves has thrown out some of the typical things that you hear whenever you talk about inspiration, from and references and things like that. And of course, like The Dark Knight Returns is one, Year One is another. So I mean that's all typical fare. But he brought one up I think it was during the DC Fandom interview where he said Batman Ego, and I'd never heard of it. Now I'm not saying I'm an expert when it comes to Batman comics, so I'm not saying like that's a huge deal. I hadn't heard of it, but I hadn't heard of it. So I was like, okay, well, we'll check it out. So I read it, and there's like, what I read was it's called Ego and Other Tales. So I would actually say the biggest story in there is actually a solo Catwoman story, which is very interesting. And part of me wonders if Zoe Kravitz's version is kind of taking some pointers from that story, because I thought that overall was really interesting. It's basically a big heist story. In it, Selena has faked her death and is now like returning to Gotham and trying to put together this big score, because she's basically kind of burned everything, as far as like anywhere she can turn. So she's kind of taken this heist on to get some money and do all that. So, but in it, like a whole bunch of stuff goes down, and it's pretty, and the ending of it is pretty, it's pretty depressing actually, how it ends up. So, but I mean, that's actually the biggest story. Like as I kept reading, I was like, this is interesting that this is all like, this is like by far the biggest story in the book, and it's a Batman book, but it's a solo Catwoman story. But overall, I thought it was really good. If Zoe Kravitz's Catwoman took a lot of inspiration from this story, I have zero things bad to say about that. So, but there's a couple of other shorter Batman stories in there, but the big one is the first one right out of the box. It basically deals with Batman witnesses something pretty horrific. I won't go into too much detail on it. And it basically leads him to wanting to give up being Batman. It makes him question, why am I doing this? And so basically how it's portrayed is it's Bruce Wayne having an argument, fight, conversation with Batman. So Batman is the ego, I guess, in that regard. And they are just going back and forth as to, shouldn't do it, should do it. And it's done. It's very powerful. Essentially, what you learn is that Bruce Wayne and Batman, like how Bruce Wayne acts and how Batman acts is a compromise between the two of them. Because Batman wants to go all out. Kill the Joker, kill all these people, because they go off and they kill people. So it's actually better to take it out at the source and not have any problems. And Bruce Wayne doesn't want to do it at all, and especially doesn't want to kill people. So that's their compromise, is to do it, but they're not going to do any, but there's no killing, and in that they both kind of find purpose within each other. Very interesting. I'd never quite seen it done that way. You'd already talked about Batman being two different, almost two different halves, but to literally personify that and have them like sitting, across from each other and having this debate back and forth, for a book that's really not that, or for a the book's not really that high on, there's not a whole lot of action and everything, but for that to have is a very gripping story. And so you're really interested to see how it all ends out. So I highly recommend it. I'm really thankful that Matt Reeves brought that up so that I could have the chance to know about it and read it. And I highly recommend it to anybody who's a Batman fan or comic book fan in general. So that is, I believe that's it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So that is our first, what are we reading? So we want to do this on a more regular basis, just to kind of give our recommendations on things we're reading, and we would love some recommendations from you as well if you have any of things that we might want to read in the future and talk about. So we'd greatly appreciate that. If you like what we're doing here at D's Nerds, we're two nerds on one channel just talking about the things we love and why we love them. Please subscribe to the channel. Please like this video if you liked it, and also hit the bell icon so you know whenever we have new videos coming out. Also, we have merch, so if you want to go down to the description down there, it has our link to our store, and anything you buy there just supports the channel. And we're also on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, so if you're missing us in between videos, you can follow us there, and we're posting content pretty much daily, just kind of depending on how our lives are going. Basically, life gets in the way, what can I say? So until next time, I'm Chris.
I'm Michelle.
And this is D's Nerds, and you guys have a great, safe rest of the day.
Bye.
Bye.